Have you ever been sitting in a room full of people, your own family, your own house, food on the table, everything that's supposed to mean you have a good life, and felt completely invisible? I'm 76 years old, and I have watched more people answer yes to that question than I can count. Not to me. They never say it out loud. I see it in the way they hold their coffee cups at church, the way they laugh just a half second too late at something their husband said, the way they look out a window when they think nobody's watching. I want to talk about something today that most people my age don't talk about. Not because it's shameful, but because for a long time, staying was the brave thing, and leaving was the selfish thing, and we all just agreed to that without ever questioning it. And I've been watching what that agreement costs people. For decades now, up close. There was a woman I knew, I'll call her Ruth to keep her story hers, who sat across from me at a church supper about 4 years ago. She was 61 at the time, married 32 years to a man everyone in town liked just fine. Good man, they'd say, steady. She told me very quietly that she'd realized something on a Tuesday afternoon she couldn't shake. She had stopped at the pharmacy on the way home, alone, because he was watching a game, and she said standing in that little aisle, picking out hand cream, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. She felt light. She felt like herself. And then she got back in the car and drove home, and the moment she turned into the driveway, it was gone, just like that. She said that moment terrified her more than anything in those 32 years ever had, because once you feel the difference, you can't pretend you didn't. Now, I wasn't divorced. My story's different. I lost my Frank, and then years later, I lost George, and grief is its own animal entirely. But I know something about what it means to suddenly have your whole life restructured, to wake up and not know what the shape of a Tuesday is supposed to be anymore. And what I've watched happen to women and men who finally walk away from long marriages that stopped being marriages a long time ago, it taught me things I think matter. Because here's what nobody tells you. The grief that comes after you leave isn't really about the person you left. Ruth didn't cry for her husband the way you might expect. She cried for a woman she used to be at 30, who had wanted to take a pottery class and never did because it wasn't something they did together. She cried for the version of herself that got quietly set aside somewhere around 1998 and never quite got picked back up. That's the grief that catches people off guard. You're not mourning who they were, you're mourning who you didn't get to become. And that hits harder than almost anything. I had a neighbor, maybe 8 years back, who left her husband after 28 years. Her kids were grown, she was 54, and she told me the strangest thing happened in those first months. She couldn't make simple decisions. She'd stand in the grocery store genuinely unsure whether she wanted chicken or salmon for dinner. Not because she was confused or distressed, but because for nearly 3 decades, meals had been built around what he liked, around what was easy, around what didn't cause a thing. She said she didn't even know what temperature she kept the house at when it was just her preference. Every single small thing had been a negotiation or a quiet surrender for so long that she'd stopped tracking her own wants. She didn't know if she was a morning person. She didn't know if she liked silence or the television on in the background. She had to learn herself like she was meeting a stranger. And I'll tell you, and this is the part nobody prepares you for, that process of learning yourself again, it takes longer than people expect. It's uncomfortable in a way that doesn't have a name, because you spent decades being certain of who you were in relation to someone else, and now that anchor is gone, and some days that feels like freedom, and some days it feels like you're floating in open water with nothing in sight. Both can be true on the same Wednesday afternoon. But something else happens too. Something the body knows before the mind catches up. My neighbor, the one who left at 54, told me about a year in she realized her migraines had stopped. She'd had them since her 40s. Assumed it was hormones, aging, just the way things were. Gone. Her sleep changed. She said she hadn't slept through the night in probably 15 years, and suddenly she was waking up rested. She'd been carrying a stress so constant, so low and steady, that she'd just called it her normal. Her body had been running some kind of silent emergency program for decades, and once she stopped, it stopped too. That's not her being dramatic, that's real. And I've heard versions of that same story more times than you'd think. Now, and I want to stay with this for a moment because it's important. The first year is not easy. I don't want to make it sound like leaving brings immediate relief and sunshine. It doesn't. What it brings is simultaneous. You grieve and you breathe at the same time. You cry on a Saturday morning because the house is quiet in a way that feels wrong. And then you eat lunch standing at the kitchen counter just because you want to, and that feels like a small miracle. Both in the same hour. That's what the first year actually looks like. And the loneliness, particularly the first winter, is something that genuinely cannot be described until you're in it. Not romantic loneliness, structural loneliness. Saturday used to have a shape. Sunday morning used to have a ritual, even if the ritual wasn't happy. Now there's just open time with no architecture, and a country and a culture that are built entirely around couples and families, and you are one person sitting in a house trying to figure out how to fill a weekend when no one needs anything from you. I watched my neighbor go through that. I brought food. I didn't ask questions. I just showed up. Because I'd learned from my own losses, my own restructured life, that what people need in those moments isn't someone wanting the story. It's someone willing to just be present without needing anything back. And that brings me to the friendships, because this part blindsides people completely. And I think if someone had warned them ahead of time, it would hurt a little less. When you leave a long marriage, your social world sorts itself into 3 groups. You will lose some people you thought were your people. Couples from the neighborhood, families you'd spent holidays with for 20 years, they pull back. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's discomfort. Sometimes it's that the friendship was actually the marriage's friendship, not yours. And letting yourself see that clearly, without bitterness, is its own kind of work. Then there are the people who want the details, who call frequently, who seem very supportive, but who are quietly collecting something. You learn to recognize that. Those people are not your support system. And then there's a small number, sometimes only 2 or 3 people, who show up, who bring food and don't ask what happened, who sit with you, who check in 3 months later when everyone else has moved on to new news. Those people are worth more than I can say. You protect those relationships. I think about Ruth again here because there's something she told me that I've never forgotten. She said that in those first months, the thing that surprised her most wasn't the hard parts. She'd expected hard. What she hadn't expected was discovering that she was funny, that she had opinions about things, that when she was in a room without him, she talked differently, laughed differently, took up more space. She'd spent so long making herself smaller that she'd forgotten she had an actual size. Now, I want to say something about the children, because if you're over 50 and you've been married for decades, your children are adults, and people assume that means it's easier. It isn't. It's different. Adult children cycle through something that looks a lot like stages, and it's predictable enough that I wish someone would just hand every parent a map. First, there's shock. Then there's a quiet, unconscious side-taking. Then guilt about that side-taking. Then anger. And the anger almost always lands on whichever parent seems to be doing okay first. Happiness gets punished in that window. You smile at the wrong moment, and suddenly you're the one who didn't try hard enough. This lasts, usually a year, sometimes closer to 2. And then, if you hold on, if you stay steady, if you don't make your children carry your loneliness, something shifts. A new honesty develops, one that never existed inside the old family performance. The holiday dinners where everyone pretended, where you performed happiness for each other year after year, that version is gone. But what comes after, if you're patient, is something more real. And more real is worth the wait. The woman I mentioned, the one who left at 54, she told me her relationship with her daughter is now the most honest it's ever been. They talk differently. Her daughter calls her just to talk, not to manage her, not to check a box, to actually talk. She said she never had that before, not ever. But I want to circle back to something because I think this is where most people get it wrong. Leaving doesn't automatically make you happy. I need to say that plainly. The absence of daily misery is not the same as a life. And the people who walk away from long, unhappy marriages and then just wait for happiness to arrive, they wait a long time, sometimes forever. The ones who actually rebuild something, and I've watched enough of them to see the pattern, they do one specific thing. Not therapy, though therapy helps. Not dating apps, not travel. One small, non-negotiable thing they chose purely for themselves. Ruth started walking at 6 in the morning before anyone else was awake, every day. Just her and the neighborhood and the birds. She's been doing it for 4 years now. She told me it was the first habit she ever built entirely for herself. No one needed it. No one benefited from it. It was just hers. My neighbor started taking a watercolor class on Tuesday nights. She's not talented. She's told me that herself, and we both laughed about it. But she goes every Tuesday. It answers a question she'd stopped asking for 30 years. What do I want to do with my evening? Just that. Something that small can be the first real answer to that question in decades. That thing, whatever it is for each person, is where the new self starts to take shape. Not in grand gestures, in Tuesday nights, in 6 a.m. walks, in sitting in a restaurant alone and ordering what you actually want and realizing slowly that you're okay. More than okay. The dating question always comes up, and I'll address it briefly because I think the advice people give is almost entirely wrong. People who rush back into relationships, looking for something familiar, something to fill the silence, they almost always end up somewhere they'd been. The ones who find real connection are the ones who spent a year being genuinely bored on a Friday night without reaching for the phone in panic, who learned a difference between being alone and being lonely, and it takes time to understand that difference in your body, not just your head. I was alone for 13 years after Frank died. 13 years. I didn't think I wanted anyone. And then I met George at a church potluck, and he made me laugh in a way I'd forgotten I could laugh, and I had 5 more years I wouldn't trade for anything. So I know personally, that life has a way of surprising you if you stay open. But you have to get right with yourself first. You have to stop running from the quiet. There is one more thing I want to say, and this is the part that matters most to me personally after watching all of this up close. The most common regret I've heard from every single person I've talked to who finally left a marriage that had stopped working isn't that they left. Not one of them. The regret is always the opposite. It's the years before. The decade of staying because they thought staying was the more honorable choice. Because leaving looked like failure and staying looked like strength. And every single one of them, when they finally look back, sees that it wasn't strength. It was fear dressed up as virtue. Staying miserable is not the brave thing. I want to say that gently but clearly. It just isn't. The brave thing is the Tuesday morning when you admit to yourself what you feel. The brave thing is the conversation you've been avoiding for 11 years. The brave thing is standing in your own life and deciding it still belongs to you. Loneliness isn't about being alone. I've believed that for a long time. It's about not being seen. And some of the loneliest people I have ever known were sitting at a dinner table every night with someone who stopped seeing them somewhere around the mid-90s. You still have time. That's what I want you to hear. Whatever age you are right now, 50, 58, 64, you have more time ahead of you than the years you're grieving. The question is what you're going to do with it. If something in what I said today felt true for you, or if you know someone who needed to hear it, I'd be grateful if you shared this. And I'd love to know. Leave it in the comments. What's the one small thing you do just for yourself? The 6 a.m. walk, the Tuesday class, the thing that's just yours. I read every single one, and I'll see you next time.